kind of bringing in AI to be that expert to help use the tool, right? I guess is
Yeah.
the best description of it.
Darlene, it's wonderful to have you on the show today. How have you been?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm very
Of
excited
course,
about
no
this
problem at
topic.
all. And Darlene, for those who may not be aware of who you are, do you want to give them a quick intro into who you are and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, sure. So I am, I would say I'm an addicted entrepreneur and innovator. So I've been in technology for most of my career. I won't even give how many decades I've been doing it. I recently headed up innovation for an organization called DTCC, which kind of does hold up the foundation of the capital markets. But I've been an entrepreneur. I've launched multiple businesses. I've helped launch a number of businesses, one of the first music streaming apps. So I've been in the space of looking at new technology and really following it, seeing how companies can, benefit from it, helping them to adopt and scale it. It's hard with as quick as things move. Having someone there to help you guide you through it is kind of what I do and where I sit right now. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think this is a very hot topic
Yeah, for
that is making a lot
sure.
of firms and startups nervous, right?
Yeah, I would say nervous and excited in equal measure,
Yep.
Darlene. And for me, throughout my career, I've been, fairly focused on innovation and emergent technologies as well. And I don't think I've went through a period of so much change and innovation as we have over the last 18 months. So I think I'm seeing very similar trends and, customer, I suppose, attitudes toward this new emergent set of technologies. Half are nervous, half are excited, and quite a few are a blend of both. And one of the things that I'm seeing pop up time and again, Darlene, is this new moniker, service as a software. Now, whether that catches on or not is TBD. But do you want to give your thoughts on what that is and how it differs from traditional SaaS models?
Well, if you look at like a SaaS model, right, the thought is it's an online tool that allows it basically allows you to create your workflows, allows you to do your job more efficiently, right? 10 years ago, there were 15 unicorn SaaS providers out there. Today, there's more than 400 and I think 15 or more, right? The amount of tools that companies are bringing on board and playing with is a challenge, right? The concept of services software is really it kind of doesn't replace it, but can enhance it or expand it and let AI can now help with a lot of those things. Because again, SaaS, everything's still very manual, right? You put in Salesforce, you're still putting in those workflows, you're still having to determine what it is like the content that you create, you're trying to determine the personas, you're aggregating all the data and getting information. You might be using AI to determine that, but you're still doing it within the tool very manually, right? There's some automation, but it's still not quite there where AI really does kind of take away some of that need to really, it can give you statistics about your clients or information about your clients or personas right away, instantaneously, autonomously. So a lot of what you're saying when you hear service as a software, you're also hearing software as autonomous service, right? You're hearing it in different ways, but it's kind of removing from SaaS some of the manual aspects of it. So you look at some of the SaaS tools that are out there where it's like, yeah, do you need to put in the workflow? Do you really need to be able to be looking at a dashboard, setting up your reports anymore, things like that. So it really is saying, where I used to bring in this tool and have experts use these tools, well, now you are kind of bringing in AI to be that expert to help use the tool, right? I guess is the best description of it.
Right, which is really interesting. And I know when I started my career, and the pendulum seems to swing, every decade, give or take. But it was a lot of organizations that were building their own products, and they were, embedding the emergent platforms and technologies within these products. That shifted pretty dramatically then to a SaaS first focus 10 to 15 years ago, and that's been growing dramatically. But I am, for the last 2 years, hearing a lot more dissatisfaction with the SaaS models, the SaaS products that are being brought into these organizations. They can lack customization. The price of these kind of seats is going up dramatically month over month, year over year. And as you then bring all of these SaaS products together, it creates that quagmire of products that may not necessarily work as efficiently together as we would hope within an organization. So I am seeing that pendulum shift again towards custom built software from SaaS. So do you think, Darlene, with that then, and given your kind of overview of services software, that both the traditional SaaS model and this new AI driven development model can both work in harmony together, or do you think they're in competition? It's a zero sum game.
I think they're going to work in hand. I think some SaaS tools ultimately you don't need, right? I'm with you in what you had said, that custom build was not what you wanted to do, right? I didn't want to build a CRM. I didn't want to maintain it, because that's not my core business. So when I say the SaaS tools that are more at risk is where a human in the loop is less risky, right? Because you're not going to put AI everywhere and have it autonomously do your work unless you absolutely have to have a human. It's kind of like, what can it do? Those are the tools where you could bring it in and it could work alongside certain features. But again, now it's like, well, my marketing team has ability to build their own capabilities without having to have IT departments necessarily involved. So do I now have to buy that SaaS tool to help them do their job? So what of their job is complicated that you would then use a SaaS tool for? So let's say maybe the email distribution, because everybody who does marketing hates email because it's always kind of a challenge. But things like aggregating the PII data, the first party data. Do you really want someone else holding your PII data, or would you hold that in and the workflows now become something your team can control? The being able to understand the personas and things would be something that you would own. So what does that look like of your Salesforce tool in the future, right? Are you really just using their whatever, I don't know what they call it more, their exact target for email distribution? You're bringing it in for kind of the email campaigns, but certain things, the reporting, the PII data, the customer, does that sit inside? Because your marketing team actually knows how to do what they do better than Salesforce does, right? Salesforce is taking the aggregate of all marketing teams and giving you the best of what they could come up with, and then you have to kind of jerry rig your flows to it, right? So I really think it'll work together. It's just what pieces of these SaaS tools should your team now be able to take over, and where you still need that expertise, you utilize that. But I do see the number of SaaS tools reducing, or at least the complexity of the SaaS tools that you're using in-house reducing.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, that the complexity of these products may not necessarily fit the actual use case within that particular organization. There's a couple of examples in market actually that we're seeing over the last year, give or take, where significant sized organizations are now pushing back on SaaS, Klarna being an example, getting rid of or significantly reducing their footprint with Salesforce or HubSpot or otherwise, and or replacing that with either AI agents or custom built software. So it is going to dramatically change the industry. One question that a lot of the organizations that we work with then is, well, how do we identify what those use cases are, right? So which offerings or processes today are prime candidates for conversion to AI driven autonomous services? When you work with companies, Darlene, or when you're assessing AI capabilities within the market, for your clients and customers, how do you identify those candidates within those organizations that are best suited to this AI driven development process?
I think right now, because AI, yes, it's on this like crazy trajectory, as you said. Like, I don't know if we'll ever see in our lifetime a technology take off this
Right.
fast, right? And I mean, it's been around forever, so it's not like, oh my gosh, it just was created. No, it just somehow ChatGPT gave it legs to the rest of the world, right? So when you're looking at what you're going to replace, think of what are the tools that you have in-house, right? Hopefully most firms organize it. How many of you have done like build versus buy assessments? You're looking at tools and you've already got something similar in-house, but it doesn't quite fit this model. So now you got two things that are relatively similar, right? So think of the tools that you have where, AI would be best suited. So it's assessing a lot of, let's say, unstructured data. So document processing, right? Where a human in the loop could be there just to validate it. And you have probably 2 or 3 document processing tools in house, right? So start looking at your kind of what's in your repository. Where are the tools where AI would be best suited for, right? Where there are things out there. And then kind of lay out the pros and cons of what it would, but it's kind of looking at what you have now. Don't get rid of anything significant at the moment where it's so centrally ingrained. If you're going to do something that's centrally ingrained, take one aspect of it and see what you can do, and then use some of these low code tools that are out there to try to replace it, right? And do it internally and build in, the years ago, I've seen this happen where you have these digital factories, right? Do you now have these digital factory models where portions of your firm are given low code tools with someone from IT that can support them in helping them do it? But I would start with like, what are the SaaS tools that are in there? What are the ones right now that are kind of low hanging fruit that you could get rid of, that you could test the waters out? Because right now there are just a lot of challenges with large language models, not, hallucinating. That will likely never go away. But there are some capabilities that it's really good at. And so see where you have ability to kind of consolidate duplicate SaaS tools, or SaaS tools where it's like, what, we could do this in-house, and start playing with, some of these low code tools to replace them, and do it strategically. And then as you get more comfortable in the low code, the AI nature of what you're doing, start hitting some of those big ones where you're like, yeah, I'm paying a whole lot of money to some of these big players. What pieces of it could come out, right?
Yeah, there's a development kind of framework or approach or methodology as you're kind of transforming from legacy platforms to new modernized componentized architectures, called the strangler pattern. And what they encourage you to do is, as opposed to shutting down completely the old architecture or environment and then spinning up the new one and doing a flip the switch, what you effectively do is carve out sub components of that particular product and then embed it within that original legacy ecosystem, and over time you're strangling that old architecture and shifting to the new, more modern environment and architecture. And what we typically do, Darlene, is something quite similar, but at a more macro level, where you're not, as you said, pulling out your mission critical products and services, right? You're probably more leaning into your less critical services, replacing those services, whether it be with AI driven development or low code platforms, kicking the tires, making sure your data drives the right outcomes, and then over time shifting toward this new, more modern approach to building an environment.
Because this is not just it's not just a technical change. Like, I'm not just taking out this, it's like people who, you're now going, central IT, I think, is also changing, right? I think your central IT departments are, gosh, really governance, right? And administration and reporting and monitoring. And now some of those capabilities are really going to be federated, right? So this model is also going to change your people, right? How do you train with the process of how you do it? So now how do you ensure that what's being built in the business area is following those governance standard, and then the technology that choose. So it's not going to be easy, which is why, yeah, take your low hanging fruit, start with something simple, and start really building the structure of your IT departments in the future too, because I think AI is going to change almost every department. But I think IT has slowly been federating, and now I think it hits are there big IT department now that have to maintain all applications, code all applications. You've got, big workflow tools that only IT can handle, and interfaces can be done. Things are changing, and they've been changing for a number of years with like low code and no code, and AI just kind of has accelerated everything.
Yeah, and that the federated model typically shifts organizations from a centralized place of comfort to a democratized place of discomfort. And if you typically have a few individuals historically building your product, servicing your IT, and you then shift to a more federated model. Number one, there's a huge, as you said, cultural shift. Job security becomes a challenge. There's resistance within the IT team. But number two, and probably more importantly, you have to put the right guardrails in place on a lot of these platforms to make sure that those individuals that are building on these federated platforms and products are doing so in a way that's not going to negatively impact your business. So I do believe there's process changes, there's fundamental security challenges, and there's cultural shifts that all come along with this technological shift toward AI innovation and low and no code. And then the last point, Darlene, this has been fascinating for me, is with all of these changes comes inevitable kind of symptoms or buy changes in different industries. And one of the industries that has been hit pretty dramatically is the consulting industry, whether this be management consultings and the downsizing of McKinsey and Bain and BCG or otherwise, or the digital natives and the difficulty it's been in helping support all of these customers and clients over the past number of years. How do you see this wave of innovation affecting that industry?
It's a good question. So I've worked with a number of consulting firms. Like I think your strategy consulting firms will still, there's a level of comfort companies have by going to those consulting firms and saying, well, what did McKinsey say? What did Accenture say? Or what did PwC say? Like they've seen everything. What are they saying? So I see them. Where I see a lot is around those firms, those consulting firms that do pure development, right? They go in, they'll do strategy, they'll do development. I've worked with a number of startups where I've seen proposals for a new company going out there, and it's insane, $1 million, $2 million, because they want designers, they want front end developers, they want middleware API developers, and they've got the back end guys, right? Your team is 20 strong on just getting something simple up there. So
Right.
your costs are extravagant for just putting something in the market that you want to test or learn. I think that now brings it down because I'm like, well, now your consultants have low code. So what does this mean, right? Does it mean that, I'm now paying for cheaper consultants, or the consulting firms like really your kind of your digital arm, right? Where they're part of your federated model because do I need to, have IT departments all over? Can I work with these low code, these vendors or these consultants that do work with like low code tools, right? They're just as good. They can get code out, still HTML, still Java, still JavaScript. Like it's all the same stuff. It's just built in a different way where it's not a number of people doing it. It's a tool supporting it. Does that mean that your shadow ITs have more control, right? And that some of your business can still continue to work with some of these consultant firms because they can now afford it. It doesn't have to be one big, huge contract. I do think when it comes to some of the development firms, things are going to shift um,
Right.
because I think there'll be a lot more need for consultants at this level because if you federate it, right, you're going to want some of those specialized skills in those areas, but they're going to be using the tools that you have. They'll be going through your governance process. So what used to be shadow IT, I mean, do they now become just a hybrid model, right? And the central IT oversees what they're doing. They can monitor it much better. I think there are going to be smaller boutique consulting firms that are more specialized in those areas that are there helping those businesses where before it was a negative seeing them as a shadow IT. And I don't
Right.
think that's the case anymore, right?
Very interesting. So it's not the doom and gloom catastrophic future that some
No.
are predicting. Darlene, is potentially those organizations that can shift and pivot and embrace, what's ahead of us that will succeed. And by all accounts, from your perspective, both the management consulting, strategy consulting firms and the development firms or the digital natives both will succeed if they pivot in the right way.
I see smaller specialized consultants really having a leg up here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do agree with all of that, Darlene. I think there's a tendency for us to, look at worst case scenario and we see, how industries are going to change and shift. But almost, in all cases throughout history, those companies that have pivoted to embrace, what comes next will succeed. And thrive. And for me, I think that those development firms, may be impacted in the short term, and certainly those that do not change and embrace this new wave of innovation. But I do think that the successful firms will need to embrace, I would say, the problem side of the product development space, right? So in other words, how do they fundamentally understand the problem to be solved? How do they understand the voice of the customer, the jobs to be done? Really focus on the problem space and transitioning that into solution, because I do think that the development dollars that have been put toward consulting over the past number of decades is going to reduce dramatically, and that will not be the revenue generator that it has been for the past number of years. Fascinating stuff, Darlene. Well, listen, we're running up on time, but this has been amazing, Darlene. I'd like to end these discussions with one question that's common across the board, and really that's, what are you excited for, right? So you're at the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of all of this change, and there is a lot of nervousness in industry. Is there anything that jumps out at you that you're particularly excited about in terms of how these changes will impact society?
Impact society. I mean, what I love about what's happening with AI and some of what's happening with like DLT, we've always had challenges getting information across countries, across like, are we going to get to a place where now it's a little bit easier to work across companies? I think DLT, along with AI, along with quantum, are going to be huge for, how many times are you tired of putting in a username and password?
Right.
Right. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be able to control my own information. I want to know where my information is going to. So I really feel like AI is going to accelerate, in my mind, the future internet. So, where right now it's very owned, it's very federated. I think it's going to come back and owned by the individual. I think it will accelerate a lot of this blockchain distributed ledger capabilities that allow you to hold on to your own information. So, agentic AI, like, I'm just excited by a lot of it because it's going to change things, right?
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of it because I know it's, will we get to AGI?
Right.
Probably not.
Exactly.
We will get really good at making you feel like it's there, right? We'll
Sure.
make it feel so much like that robot speaking or that AI speaking to me, it understands it. But in the end, it doesn't have a gut. It doesn't have instinct. It's going to go off of a probability. And that probability, it doesn't know, well, I shouldn't probably do this, right? So, I'm very excited about what we're seeing. I'm looking forward to seeing, what happens with SaaS tools, right? Because I am one that grew up in the decade of build versus buy.
Mm-hmm.
And having thousands of those assessments under my belt, right? I'm looking forward to kind of seeing where it all goes. So,
Yeah, and
you name it, I'm excited.
Darlene, it's interesting, and I'd love to do a follow-up conversation, but you did weave in a number of technologies that have been on the forefront of these waves, whether it be quantum, agentic, AI, blockchain, or otherwise. And I do think we're at a point where all of these technologies and innovations are coming together, which is truly exciting. But Darlene, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
As always, this has been a wonderful conversation. We appreciate it, and hopefully we can do it again soon. Thank you so much,
Sounds
Darlene.
good.